Welcome to the Only Dream Big podcast, starring your host, Donnie Bedney. Only Dream Big is a podcast where Donnie will share tips and experiences on different topics, such as acquisition entrepreneurship, human capital, and the future of the workforce. He is the president of PSP Metrics and has been in the assessment and human capital management industry for more than 15 years, with the goal of driving change through people. As your guide on dreaming big, let's hear from the man himself.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Only Dream Big podcast. I'm your host, Donnie Bedney, and I'm so excited to have Poppy MacDonald with us today. Poppy, welcome to the pod.
Thank you for having me, Donnie. It's so awesome to reconnect.
It is. So, one, thank you again, just, as a guest today. We like to start off just, thinking through a little bit of your background. You can take us back as far as you want or as early in your life, as you want. But I know that you've, kind of played some really cool roles and actually run a pretty cool organization doing some amazing things now. When you were, say, at what point in your life did you really, did it crystallize, if you will, for you to, be working with really amazing people, entrepreneurs, building businesses, all of that? Was that always an aspiration, or is that something that kind of I don't know, just maybe came into existence somehow?
That's a great question. So, yeah, I grew up in Salem, Oregon. I had parents who had me pretty young, 19 and 20. They really weren't expecting to have a child at that time, still pretty young themselves and growing up. And they really worked incredibly hard and had big aspirations that I would have a great life. But I think for them, it was, they had talked to me about, hey, think about being a flight attendant, or think about, because you could fly on an airplane, and we had never been on an airplane. They thought about, think about being a manicurist, because they knew a manicurist who was able to support her family really well. And so I would say they wanted a good life for me. They weren't, they probably weren't pushing as some, parents do. And I just had this feeling of hey, I want something different. I want to have an impact. And I wasn't sure what that was. I definitely didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. I had the great fortune of a friend's dad took me under his wing, and he happened to be the admissions officer at Willamette, which is a private college in Salem, Oregon. And really helped me think about applying to colleges and financial aid. And I was the first person in my family to go to college. And when I was at college, again, I had an awesome mentor who took me under her wing, my advisor, Professor Liss, and she said, hey, for your junior year, think about going to Washington, D.C. and do an internship and get that sort of job experience. I'm concerned that you don't know what you want to be when you grow up or what you want to do. And I will say it was so surprising to me when I landed in Washington, D.C., and I had this internship with the McLaughlin Group, which was one of the first of its kind media roundtables. And I am just pouring through the day's news, and I've got, the news on, I'm pouring through the papers, I'm, online doing research, and I'm oh my gosh, this is a job. I could get paid to be feeling like the center of what's happening in Washington, D.C., and really consuming information and learning and growing, and then figuring out how to translate that to an audience in a way that they understand. And I was like, this is cool. I didn't know jobs exist like this. And at that point, I really started my strange meandering career journey, it would seem, but I'd say what connects all the paths is taking complex information and making it relevant to your audience. And I think you said too, when did I get the entrepreneurial bug? I didn't have the entrepreneurial bug then, I would say. So that journey looked like I got my first job on Capitol Hill. I was a legislative correspondent answering constituent mail and helping explain what was happening in Washington. I was a press secretary. And I think the entrepreneurial bug came a little bit later, where we worked together at Gallup.
Got it.
And I was applying for a role at Gallup in their healthcare practice. And then someone said, well, you may, given your government background, you may also want to talk to our colleague who is thinking about this world poll ambition of our CEO, which is we want to poll the world. And guess what? got to figure out a way to pay for that, right? That's not cheap. Like going to 190
Yeah,
countries every year, asking the same core set of questions. How would we pay for that? Who would the customers be? What would we charge for that? How would
sure.
we package it in a way that would make sense? And so I got that entrepreneurial bug then,
Yep.
and then that led me to a series of jobs which were still about taking
Mhm.
information, packaging it, and making it accessible to the public.
Mm.
And it leads me to media, led me to media, where I worked for Politico and launched their first subscription business,
Yep.
went to Atlantic Media and for National Journal, launched their first membership model. And then
Mm.
today I'm at USAFacts, and we are not for profit. So we have no motives about making any money, but it is I'd call it a heroic effort to take all of this government data in the United
Yeah.
States that's technically publicly available, incredibly
Mhm.
hard to get access to, and
Yep.
make it available to the public in a way that's accessible and
Mm.
understandable so that we can empower Americans with the facts
Yeah.
and have government and voters start leveraging data again to understand, like, is our
Mm.
country headed in the right or wrong direction by the
Mm.
numbers? And
Yeah.
how can we move democracy forward in a way that benefits all Americans? And
Wow.
so it's a really exciting effort to be a part of. And I'd say there are 90,000 government entities in the United States of America. So we've got long runway in terms of when will we run out of uh, gathering this government data and making it available and usable. So
Yeah.
yeah, lots of opportunity ahead.
Well, I mean, so this is one of the reasons I was so excited about, speaking with you today is just because I think that I would describe your background as really just an amalgamation of, amazing opportunities that you've always been willing to, and frankly, brave enough, I think, to, accept the challenge, right? And be the first to do new things and to even build new things, whether as an entrepreneur or entrepreneur, right? And so that is, so inspiring. How do you, I'm going to take us down an interesting path, I think. And we'll start here. But, as you transitioned, um, I think a lot of times for folks, it's sometimes a struggle to know um, when is the right time to make that transition, right? And so, I remember as we were getting to know each other, that the timeline where you were my go-to was significantly shorter than like what I had wished or hoped it to be. But you had done some amazing things with our organization and got an amazing opportunity, which you felt like the time was right to explore that. And so, speaking to folks a little bit about, transitions to, next challenges, if you will, any kind of, tips, can you kind of unpack some of the ways that maybe you go about evaluating, like, what is the next challenge that you end up taking on?
That's a really great question. I'd say I was really fortunate when the Politico opportunity came up that I had this great job at Gallup, right? I worked with awesome people who
Yeah.
inspired me. I love the culture. And I wasn't in a place of, I've just got to leave this, right? So
Mhm.
it wasn't like I was desperately seeking something new. It was like the right thing has to inspire me and excite me
Mm.
and make me want to leave, like convince me to leave this organization. And
Yeah.
so in terms of the checklist I would look at, I would say is what is the what it like in terms of the opportunity, I was looking at, is there a market need that hasn't been served, right? Like,
Mhm.
do I believe there would be a customer demand for this? Is this something
Mhm.
that I would want? And so when Politico was saying, hey, we want to launch a subscription business, and we think there is content people would pay for
Mhm.
because it gets them, inside of these rooms, inside the hallways of Congress that they haven't been in, and it could
Mhm.
drive how they make decisions for their business based on
Mm.
what's happening in Congress. I was like, yeah, I could see that. That would be really valuable information.
Mm.
So can you see, is it differentiated? Is it unlike other products that you know to exist? Do you believe it has value? Can you see like a customer base for that? And it's something that like I think we know, right? When you're part of a startup, starting something from the ground up, like you're kind of giving your life to it, right? Like there's not a simple hours of you start at this time, you end at this time. There isn't a full support staff, right? I was the first employee. So it's like need to build a list of potential customers. Go do that yourself in your own spreadsheet, right? Need to develop a pitch about like, what is the value of this? Go do that yourself, right? I mean, everything has to be done by like every job by that first employee. Need coffee cups? I don't know. Go order them. Go buy them at the store. Like it was really about, are you going to be willing to kind of do every job and put your heart, soul, and passion into building this thing? And if you're not really excited about it, it's not worth it, right? And yes, of course, eventually the staff comes, right? People come to help you do these jobs, but like at the beginning, it's all you. So I think you have to be like, I am excited about that. I want to build that thing, and I'll do all the jobs, right? So that's my checklist, and I felt that way about USAFacts too. Like when I got that call, I was at Politico. It's an amazing news organization covering politics and policy in Washington. It was a newsroom of 500 people, and some would say, why would you leave that to go be the fifth employee of USAFacts? And it's because I was so proud of what Politico was doing in terms of covering what was happening in Washington. At the same time, when I heard we want to make government data accessible so that we can rebuild trust in Americans, so that people on different sides of the aisle can start with agreement on the same facts. And that could drive better debate, that could build trust, and that could lead to better outcomes for Americans, right? It's a democracy driven by numbers, not by party or adjectives. And I thought, like, that doesn't exist. I don't know where one would go for government data. And I have a ton of empathy for like, why don't reporters use government data? It's really hard to get, right? They're on this publish, right? They've got I don't know, 2 hours, like they're trying to break the news, like and I feel I have a lot of empathy for politicians. I worked in Capitol Hill. Their staffs are tiny, and they have to represent every single issue around the globe. They don't have time to go and pull data. And I have empathy for my uncle who shares the craziest things on social media that I'm like, oh my gosh, like that is just not true. And I have to privately message him and say, it's just the facts don't support this. And because he doesn't have time, he sees something and he's like, this seems so wrong and I'm so upset about this. And he just shares it. And now he's not. Now he's like, Bobby, is this true? But I really want to share it. So I have empathy for, it's really hard to get government data. And our founder, Steve Ballmer, found this out himself because he left Microsoft as CEO and he wanted to do more from a philanthropic perspective to lift kids out of poverty. But he said, before I do that, I'm a numbers guy. I want to understand the problem. I want to understand how government is tackling poverty. I want to understand what programs exist, how much has been spent over time, what are the outcomes. And folks at Microsoft said, give us a couple weeks and we'll get that for you, like happy retirement gift kind of thing. And 6 months later, they were finally able to pull that data together. So it took them 6 months. And it's like, it shouldn't take 6 months for somebody trying to make a data-driven decision to get that data. Steve can imagine running Microsoft. I know you can't imagine running your company without data. Gallup was all about, right, providing data to organizations from their customers, from their employees to make better decisions. And we think government data should be just as accessible.
Sure. I mean, that's so, yes, absolutely. Very, very well, that response was fantastic. So where my mind is going, but I'm kind of tempering myself right now, is I want to really talk about what you just shared, just around data. And so one quick thing that I'll say, and we don't have to go down a rabbit hole on this today, but promise me that we'll have this conversation offline. Do you believe that, I will state it this way. I have developed a belief, and it came to me very clearly a couple months ago, that I believe that a lot of organizations who claim to be data driven are merely data informed. I don't believe that they're actually making decisions as a result of what the data is telling them. I think that they are. I think that in general, we as a society have so much data now, but I'm not sure that we're actually using it to drive a lot of our decisions as much as we're being informed by the data, and then we kind of are choosing the data in order to make whatever decisions we want, not necessarily decisions based on what the data is telling us. Is it fair to say that that is kind of, one of the reasons why your organization frankly exists, is so once again, like, we can have data and maybe, push people and organizations to actually make truly data-driven decisions?
Definitely. I mean, I think you started with are people going to cherry pick data to make their own case kind of thing? Are there's going to be bias when they're like looking at the
Yeah,
numbers and pulling it? Yeah, probably. And even if they didn't intend to have bias, right?
yeah,
It could be colored, or even just the perception of is it biased could be
yeah,
colored by the audience because they know that the organizations sharing that data have a particular
yeah,
belief or an outcome that they're driving toward. And it's interesting because when we have gone to Capitol Hill and met with senators and members of Congress,
yeah,
yes, there are entities like think tanks, or even within the Republican Party and the Democratic Party have entities that do research and pull data, right? But if you're
yeah,
trying to bring people together
yeah,
from different sides of the aisle, from different political parties,
yeah,
and say, can we all agree on this data?
yeah,
If it's coming from an entity, stamped from an entity that has a particular bent to it,
yeah,
there's going to be skepticism, even if
sure.
it's just the facts, right? And
Yeah,
there is this treasure trove of data. The United States, like our taxpayers, like we
yeah,
pay
hmm,
billions of dollars to have the government collect data to track
yeah,
the effectiveness of what we're doing, and we're just not making it available in a usable way to
yeah,
lawmakers or
hmm,
to voters.
yeah,
And I think citizens are like, we are the shareholders in this country,
yeah,
and we deserve to have access to data and by the numbers. How are we
yeah,
moving? Oh, and by the way, the government has a model for this. It's called a 10K. They
hmm,
require publicly traded companies for their shareholders to
yeah,
report in a transparent way, where you
hmm,
can't, I mean, certainly there have been bad stories of corporations cooking the books, and they
yeah,
get into a lot of trouble for that, right? But
sure.
the CEO and the CFO have to sign their name saying this is the accurate and fair accounting of the numbers for how
Yeah,
our company is doing, so that a shareholder can decide, do I invest? What change would I want to see?
hmm,
And shouldn't that, if the government has that model for publicly traded companies to
yeah,
be accountable to their shareholders, shouldn't the
hmm,
government do that for themselves on
sure.
behalf of their own constituents? So,
Yeah,
yes, it is, hey, deciding is this particular policy good, or, should we change direction in terms of how we've been dealing with this particular issue, shouldn't be
hmm,
based on, well, now this party's in power, or that party was in power, or we don't like it because it was
yeah,
passed by that particular member of Congress. It
yeah,
should be, is it working by the numbers, yes or no, right?
yeah,
And we think it should be, not that we think that government could benefit
hmm,
by following the numbers similar to how companies do,
yeah,
and that it just should just be transparent and accessible. And
yeah,
because we have no mission other than empowering Americans with the facts, and
yeah,
so we aren't advocating for any particular outcome. We
yeah,
want the facts to be accessible to everyone, and I think that helps us sit in the middle, where we have been able to bring together
yeah,
senators from both parties and say, like, let's talk about our country by the numbers. And
yeah.
so it's been really, really meaningful.
That's really cool. That's really cool. Well, so many other directions we could go. Unfortunately, time is limited today. So as we start winding down, it just pivoting us back to, some more practical and pragmatic tips for, folks who are dreaming big, making decisions, maybe even driving organizations. Speaking of the numbers, right? What advice can you give to folks? We talked about a checklist for you kind of making decisions. But have you found, as you've transitioned, is there any sort of philosophy that you have for, say like leaving an organization better than when you came, or, anything along those lines that people can kind of, tap into and maybe hold on to as they continue to think about navigating? Because if they find an amazing problem to solve that has great market share in an organization that they, believe in, or values, kind of coincide with their own, I think that you've been very clear that those are, some facts that, folks should consider as part of that. But just any kind of, mantras for, the organizations that, you're kind of leaving and moving into a new one, or frankly, even just mantras for starting with a new organization.
Yeah, I mean, I think they would probably sound pretty basic, but one I would say is treat people with kindness, treat people with
Mhm.
respect, right? And you don't want to burn a bridge,
Yeah.
let alone just be somebody who is kind of forgettable, right? Like, they were fine. They like kind of kept to themselves, or they had sharp elbows at worst, right?
Sure.
And look, we're still in touch after all of these years from being at Gallup, and
Yeah.
it's treat people with kindness, because you just never know when your path's going to cross again in the future. And
Yeah.
so give that respect, treat people with kindness, try to be helpful.
Mm.
I worked for David Bradley, Atlantic Media, who called it a spirit of generosity. Treat
Mm.
people with a spirit of generosity. Be
Hmm.
helpful, be kind, and that was for your customers and to your fellow employees.
Yeah.
And then I'd say the second thing is like focus on the job. Yes, dream big, dream of that next job. But what I find sometimes gets in people's way is they're
Yeah.
so busy dreaming about the next job, and it's all about a promotion, that they're
Mm.
not doing a great job in the job they have, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so do really focus on the job you have, knock it out of
Hmm.
the park, and then start doing things that are above and beyond the title that you have or the job
Mm.
you have. That's going to
Hmm.
get you noticed for the promotion, right? And of course,
Sure.
when the promotion comes, I'm not saying you'll just be noticed, don't worry about it. Raise your
Yeah.
hand. But when you raise your hand, they're going to be like, oh, yeah, that person.
Yeah.
They've been doing an amazing job.
Yeah.
And we keep seeing them do other things that are above and beyond. They're coaching and mentoring others. They're
Hmm.
always offering when there's like the project that needs to get done at the last minute.
Yeah.
They are always like, hey, how can I help? Right. And
Yeah.
yeah, of course, they're natural for like this next job.
Yeah.
And so I think between like treating people with kindness and like
Hmm.
being someone who is awesome in the job that they have, like
Yeah.
those two things not only will like open opportunities where you
Hmm.
are, but like I think for both of us, but for me, right, I got that call from Politico from a former Gallup employee who was like, "Hey,
Mm.
I kind of
Wow.
knew you. Like you were kind, and
Yeah.
you did a good job, and
Yeah.
I now I need somebody here." And so you came to mind, right? Like it will
Yeah.
it will open doors for you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we are so aligned on that, and how I've seen it kind of manifest, in my own life, and I've encouraged others to do it, which is basically just a reframe of what you just stated. Is I believe that momentum is a real thing, and it is impossible for you to, not be present in the current role that you are. And so, if you will, like downshifting in the current role that you are, and then somehow believing that you will hit the ground running in whatever your next opportunity is highly improbable. I don't like to say anything's impossible, but just highly improbable. And so I think that there's so much power into leaning into the roles and responsibilities that you have, to the point where you're able to then carry that momentum into the next organization or opportunity that you have, because therein is the only true way that you can kind of hit the ground running, which is beneficial for the organization that you're joining the alumni network for, just as much as, kind of maybe just from a character perspective, you're kind of carrying that on into your new opportunity or new organization. So, Poppy McDonald, it has been such a pleasure, my friend. Thank you for the nuggets and the gems, stopping by the Only Dream Big pod today. It's been absolutely amazing having you. Thank you to all the listeners. We appreciate you all for tuning in every week. This has been the Only Dream Big podcast. We'll see you next week.